Hi guys, this is Vishal here from Rapcode. So in this video, we will understand how to make a simple REST API call to fetch data and store it in database, right? So Rapcode has a very good support of REST APIs where you can integrate with any system in the world which has support of REST API so that we can pull data, push data, store data in database or build application on top of those REST APIs without storing anything, right? So we'll cover all these scenarios one by one in a series of videos. So here we are just talking about fetching the data and storing it in the database and then probably displaying it in the form of data list or table. Okay, so let's see how that can be done. So in this video, we will fetch this data through REST API and store it in Rapcode collection, right? So let's see how that can be done. So Airtable has a very good support of REST API. So I'll go to the API documentation. So this is the API documentation specifically for this base which I've created. And I've also generated a key for myself, which is your token, right? So if you want to generate a token, you can generate it from here, from the developer hub, right? So let's go and fetch this. So what I'll do, I'll go to the documentation and see the API to retrieve the list of records. So this is the API. So I'll just copy the URL. Okay. And now let's go to Rapcode and see how this works. So in Rapcode, to interact with any REST API, we have a module called external APIs, right? So this basically is a hub where you will configure all your APIs, whether you want to pull data, push data, update, delete, anything, all will come here. So let's go and create an external API. So here it is expecting a URL, a type of call, whether it's get call, post call, put, patch, and all. Okay, some data. So we'll cover all these things one by one in a series of video. For now, let's just focus on fetching data and storing in the database. So I'll give a name. Let's say fetch Airtable projects. That's all. It's a get call because you see in the API, usually you get to know whether it's a get call or post call. So this is a get call. So get call and the URL. That's all. Send dynamic data. We have support of sending dynamic data. Like if you want to send data from some collection, you want to send data from session and other things. So for now, we'll just leave it because we're not sending dynamic data. This is something which we'll cover in some other video. Now it is asking me whether we have to send in something in headers. So here, if you see -h means header. So in curl, -h is header. So we need to send authorization, bearer, and the token, right? So I'll just copy authorization. I'll paste it in the key. In the value, it's bearer and the token. So I already have copied the token and then I'll paste the token, right? So this is how do we do it. You can also pass these value dynamically. So we have this support. So you can pass from current logged in user, from browser session, environment variables, project constant. So all these we'll cover in other videos. Okay. So for now, I've given a hard coded token, authorization, and the URL and configuration. So this is good enough to make a call and to fetch the data, right? So I'll say send request. So it will make a sample call and it has brought some data, right? So now I'll say process response. So now we want to basically process this response. So either we can store it in the Rapcode collection or we can use it directly to display on the table. So we'll cover both the scenarios one by one in two videos. So here in this video, we'll say whatever is coming from your table, just store it locally. So we have created a collection in Rapcode, which is a project, and it has a couple of fields called name, description, status, priority, and started. I think these are the same fields which we have here. So I just created a similar collection so that we can pull the data from this REST API and store it locally in the Rapcode. Okay. So as of now, you see there is no data. Now what we want to do, we want to fetch data and then store it here. So I'll say process response, save response data, basically save the data. Now it is asking me in which collection you want to save the data. So we'll say save in project collection. It has opened all the keys of that collection and the values in which the data is coming, right? So first we need to see that in which path the data is coming, right? So you get a list of data. So here if you see the data is coming inside record. So this is an array, right? And if you go to the Airtable API, you will see that the data comes inside record. So this is a list of data. So this square bracket is list. So we are saying we are getting all the list in this records. So I'll just copy this records. I'll paste it here. So this is the key on which the data is coming. Then that what is the unique key? So as of now, we are not storing any unique key. Ideally, we should be storing this Airtable ID so that it gets mapped to a Airtable ID. So this is basically needed when you want to avoid duplicate, because each record in Airtable is unique. So we want to make sure that whenever we are storing the data in Trapcode collection, we are checking whether we already have the data or not. So it's always a good practice to store that particular unique field, right? So as of now, we don't have a unique field. Now it is saying uniquely identifiable column. So I'll say ID. ID is my uniquely identifiable column. I'll paste it here. Name. So name is coming inside fields dot name, right? Fields dot name. So what I'll say, fields dot name. So we are basically looping inside the JSON, right? Inside the hierarchy of the JSON. Description, similarly, fields dot description. Why I am doing it? Because in the record we are getting all the data. Now we need to go to the each end of each key so that we know that this particular value we are getting the actual value. Okay, so in fields dot description we are getting the description. In fields dot start date. Okay, so I'll say field dot start date. So you need to make sure that you copy as it is. Then fields dot priority. Fields dot priority actually started, we should have copied here. And then fields dot status. Fields dot status. Okay, so now we have created an API which is saying that go through the records and fetch all the data and store it in the collection using these particular keys, right? And then I'll say save settings. So the API is done. Now we'll call this API. To call this an API, there are several ways to do it. So what we'll do, we'll just create an event. In the event, we'll bind very simple action that fetch data. That's all, right? So I'll go to my events and then create an event. Let's say fetch Airtable data and store in DB. A very simple event. What we'll do, we'll just go to the external APIs and say send data to external API, or basically call external API, fetch Airtable projects successfully fetch. That's all. Okay. You can save browser response in session if you want. So I'll just skip all this and that's all. So we have created a very simple event where we are saying make that API call, bring the data from Airtable and store it in Trapcode collection. So now let's go to a page, create some dummy button or something and just fetch this. As of now, if you go to the collection, there is no data because we have not yet made any API call, right? So I'll go to the components, drop a 2-column layout and then just drop a button. Okay, I'll say button, change it from type from submit to button and change the name to, let's say, fetch Airtable projects. That's all. And in the workflow event, I'll choose fetch Airtable data and store in DB, right? Very simple event which is just making an API call, fetching the data and storing it in the database. That's all. Okay, now let's preview. So let me click this button. It will call the event and fetch the data. So I'll click it. It has made an API call and fetch data successfully and shown me the success message. So now let's go to the collection and see whether the data is here or not. So I'll just click. You see the data is here. So it's bringing 3 records at a time. Maybe there is some limitation from Airtable, which we'll see. But yeah, this is basically how you fetch the data. Now let's go and add more record to the Airtable. Okay, so let's say test fetch description, status, let's say in progress, priority high, some date, right? Now if I go to Trapcode, this data will not be there by default, but if I fetch it again, it should bring it, right? So I'll click fetch data again. So I'll reload this. It should bring the records, right? So actually, if there was a limitation that it was fetching just 3 records, so I removed it. So it is fetching all. Now let's try again. Let's create one more. So let's say fetch 2222. Let's say some other description, to do priority low, some date. Okay. Now let's call the API again. Fetch here table. So it will make a call and show the data and store the data so that we can see it here. So fetch it again. So the data is here. So this is basically how real-time API is calling Airtable, fetching data and storing database. So this is a very simple example of integrating REST APIs with Rapcore. So like you want to integrate with some project management tool or support tool or anything, you're going to fetch data from an external data source and store it in database. This is how it can be done. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you again in the next video. Bye bye.